Okay, so let's air this out now. You're probably surprised it took me so damn long to review this one. Well, I was just waiting on the opportune time. Ever since I watched the AVGN episode and I started doing reviews myself, I wanted to get my hands on it just to see how bad it was. In fact, I even got him to sign my box copy that I found in Wisconsin a few years back. I found it to be a great price, so I picked it up. So I'm gonna get some flack for saying this, but I don't think Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is as bad as everyone claims it to be. Yes, it's not good. Yes, it's seriously flawed in its design. But is it really so unplayable? I think where everyone gets that misconception is just how the game actually works, which I think I figured out. First, the story. According to the manual, Jekyll is leaving his lab to marry his fiancée. Apparently everyone else in London doesn't want this to happen, so they set out to stop him in a bunch of effed up ways. The only other part to the story is the fact that Jekyll cannot let his inner Hyde overcome him. If this happens, game over, man. Game over. So before I get to how the game operates between the Jekyll vs. Hyde mechanics, I want to talk about how each character's game plays out, as they are pretty damn different. Jekyll is a slow walk through the countryside, just trying to get to the church at the other side of the city, or at least that's what it seems like. He has a cane as a so-called weapon, but it's fairly useless, as it's only good for swatting down the erratic bees that you may encounter. The cane is ineffective against any humans, and even smaller creatures you would expect a cane to work with, such as the spiders. Every other enemy must be avoided as Jekyll. This is easier said than done. Bombs are dropped by innocent-looking men. Other humans will rush quickly by Jekyll, pushing him out of the way in their haste. Birds will shit on you. Cats will scream at you and run towards Jekyll. Dogs are probably one of the harder enemies to dodge since they change direction so quickly. But if you can figure out patterns, they aren't so bad. But the singing ladies are the worst, as they aren't easy enough to avoid since the notes they are singing are completely random. You can give the lady 10 coins to shut her up, but that also requires becoming Hyde first, which you want to avoid the most when you can. If you get hit too many times, you'll notice your stress level start leaning towards the H for Hyde, and if this happens, Jekyll will turn into Hyde. Most enemies won't directly damage your life, but if that depletes, whether as Jekyll or as Hyde, you'll die and the game is over. So let's talk about Hyde's playstyle now. It is much more action-oriented, as Hyde is walking from the right to the left, punching and shooting his enemies, which happen to be mostly demonic in nature. Punching isn't recommended, as the game's so-called Psycho Wave will do more damage and has more coverage than the punch. This wave is activated by pressing up and B, and requires no special ammo or anything. The only catch is that only one wave can be active at any one time. It has a strange trajectory that seems random, but it isn't, and you're going to want to learn how this works ASAP. In order to resume playing as Jekyll, you need to kill enough enemies to bring that stress meter back to the J. Getting hit by enemies will usually drop a bit of life, although clearing Hyde's stage will turn back to Jekyll will replenish a good chunk of it. In addition, some enemies will drop coins, which you'll want to grab for Jekyll. Alright, so now you know the basics of the game. But why does everyone bitch about it? Well, for one, the bombs. I can understand a lot of players' frustrations on these. Someone sets it, and if you can't figure out how to dodge the blast, which is nearly invisible, you'll almost always turn into Hyde immediately. The way I found to be best is to wait until you hear it get ready to explode. As soon as you hear that noise, immediately jump. As long as you're a few steps away, whether it be to the left or the right of the bomb, you'll usually prevent any damage to your life or stress. Stress! If you can get this down properly, your enjoyment of the game may increase a few notches. Second, and what I feel to be more important, is actually why you might suddenly die as Hyde. I didn't record that at all since it didn't happen during my playthrough, but here's how the game works. You want Jekyll to always be farther than Hyde. It may not seem like it, but both characters are walking the same stages. So as Jekyll starts from the left, Hyde is on the right. But Hyde's stage is literally just Jekyll's first stage mirrored and darkened. With me so far? Good. When Jekyll completes a stage, you stay as Jekyll. However, Hyde stays on his own path in sets of levels. So if Jekyll makes it to level 5 and then turns into Hyde, Hyde will start back at level 1. If Hyde moves on to level 2, then turns back into Jekyll, then Jekyll makes it back to level 7 before turning back, Hyde is still going to be at where you left him, in level 2. Here's where the confusion may lie. If Hyde ever meets the exact point where you left Jekyll, that bolt of lightning will strike him, killing them both and causing the game to be over. So in essence, you just don't want Hyde to catch up to Jekyll. Because of this, it's actually easier to start off the game at level 1, because even though there's infinite continues, would you really want both characters to start off at the same level with a much higher chance of Jekyll losing his sanity? And that brings me to point 3 of why everyone hates this game. The complete randomness of your enemies as Jekyll. For Hyde, it's not so bad since you have a legitimate way of attacking your threats. But Jekyll doesn't have that convenience. If your enemies were predictable, the game would be much more enjoyable. But few enemies can be considered predictable. Spiders drop from their threads whenever they feel like it. Humans may pass by you harmlessly, but some will suddenly strike within a step of you. I already mentioned the bombs, but if there's an enemy that decides to get a bit close and attack, you might not be able to react quick enough to jump over that bomb's explosion. And that's not all. Again, the singing lady is nearly impossible, and if you don't have any coins, you'll have to pass through 2 waves of never-ending notes. But what about the gravediggers that just duck down and then throw dirt your way? You'll never know exactly where that dirt is going to fly to, so you may or may not get lucky in dodging that dangerous dirt. This is the stuff that will make you quit playing. But again, the beginning of the game isn't so bad. The enemies are spaced out enough that you can learn how the enemies work. But when you get to level 4 or 5 or so, there's so much crap on the screen that hates you that the game simply becomes unfair. Birds shitting, dirt flying, ladies singing, hunters shooting. This is sounding like a horrible remix of 12 Days of Christmas called 12 Days of Jekyll and Hyde. It becomes simply impossible to dodge everything, and Jekyll does get pushed back when hit, which is what makes some of the enemies even more infuriating. I stopped around level 5 or 6, and that's simply because I lost all my life and did not want to continue since I got so far. That's right, all the footage you're seeing here was done on one playthrough. The graphics of the game aren't too bad. Animations are lacking some frames, but at least the town looks decent. Hyde stages are definitely much more grotesque, and they have that excellent gloomy atmosphere that show the darker nature of Hyde. As for sound, it's a shame that there's really only 2 tracks, as they are, in my opinion, pretty well done. The lighter Jekyll theme seems innocent enough, so it kind of lures you into a false sense of security. Hyde's theme is much more appropriate, giving off that horror vibe that it deserves. I wish I could say the sound effects were just as good though. Most enemies are annoying to listen to, but the cat is just painful to hear. Atari-like sound effects are played whenever the hunter is shooting birds down, and the less said about the singing lady, the better. At least that is supposedly accurate, since it said that her singing is so bad that it's why your stress level increases when around her. So that's how Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde works. As I said, it's not a good game. There's some serious flaws in the flow of the game, mostly because of the completely unpredictable nature of the mid to late game enemies and the quantity of them forcing you to sometimes turn to Hyde within seconds. But Hyde's sections are actually somewhat fun to play. It's a shame the game is forced over once Hyde reaches Jekyll's point, as I feel like the developers should have maybe put in multiple endings depending on who reaches the end of the game first. I think that would have worked better than the instant death. It probably also would have resulted in fewer raged players. Again, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde isn't as bad as everyone seems to claim it to be, but please don't misunderstand me. It's still not a good game. If you want to play it, it's pretty cheap in the wild. Just be prepared for an extremely flawed challenge. Final score? 5 out of 10. This is Reaper. Happy fragging.